What if I told you that how sweetly you talk to your child can make them trust you or not? And when kids don't form a secure, trusting attachment with their parents, they're more likely to become adults with trust issues that can make it hard to form close relationships. But fear around the risks of not speaking nicely to your children can make you worried about how to keep their behavior under control, or risk that your child may never learn limits and grow into a polite adult, often leading to more stress and anxiety for parents. Let's start with how to speak warmly to your child. Then I'll tell you how to do that without being a pushover. It's easier than you may think. And you're going to love the specific examples of how to speak sweetly to your child and still get them to respect you and do what you ask. Then we'll wrap up with the very real risks of what happens when you focus on setting limits, but ignore how to speak to your child. Let's get to it. First, what does it mean to speak sweetly to a child? It involves being aware of and intentional about your tone of voice, word choice, and voice volume. For younger children, the best approach is typically to become more animated than your normal talking style. Almost like you're playing a character, like you're an actor embodying the role of super sweet mom or super sweet dad. I'm going to give you 3 examples. In this first example, you're greeting your child in the morning. So I'm going to go into super sweet mom mode, which is slightly embarrassing doing this on camera. You might say, "Good morning, sweetie. It's so nice to see you today. Did you sleep well?" And that is an example of how to speak really sweetly to your child. The second one would be when you're responding to your child when they seem hurt or scared and they've started to cry. And so maybe you don't quite know the whole situation yet, but you know that they need some sort of assistance. So you might get into your super sweet mom mode and say, "Oh no, are you okay? What happened?" There, and pat them as they calm down to offer support and give them a hug. The third example is listening when they're telling you a story. And so they're speaking to you and you are attentively listening, showing eye contact and showing that you're interested. And you might say, "Oh, that's very interesting. Why do you think that is?" And ask some sort of probing question. Now, there's no magic to it. This is just being warm, involved, and caring about them, which most parents do. It's just that sometimes the communication style doesn't always show that. You can become less animated with age, so teens definitely tend to prefer a more chill vibe from their parents. The younger kids, though, love this animation, and it really clearly shows to them that you care about them and you're speaking to them warmly or sweetly. Now, one last note about how to speak sweetly to a child. Let's talk about nonverbal gestures, because these really matter. It doesn't just matter how nicely you say something. If you're crossing your arms and you have a frown on your face, it's just not going to come across the same way if you say, "Oh no, are you okay?" It just doesn't come across the same way. In contrast, if you have an open gesture and a smile on your face, it makes a huge difference. It quickly relays your intended tone to your child. So nonverbal gestures are just as important as tone, word choice, and volume. Now, younger kids frighten much more easily than older children, so you really do want to be conscientious about your voice volume, especially if you're a gentleman with a really deep, resounding voice. You can very easily accidentally relay to your children that you're upset when really you might just be using your normal voice. So men with a deep voice and a loud voice do need to be especially conscientious of how they speak to young ones. Now, wrapping up this first section, it takes intention and a little extra effort, but speaking sweetly sets you and your child up for successful interactions and a strong foundation for your relationship. Next, a common misconception in the parenting world is that parents who speak kindly to their children are pushovers, letting them run the show and boss their parents around. It is definitely possible to be the authority figure in your parent-child relationship and teach them to respect you while also showing them love and affection. In psychology, research consistently finds that there are 4 overall types of parents. We're going to focus on 2 of those types today: permissive parents and authoritative parents. Now, there have been decades of research by Diana Baumrind that have shown that permissive parents, those who have a high level of warmth, speak very sweetly to their child, and low boundaries, so they don't set and enforce limits and boundaries, that this type of permissive parenting is more likely to result in children who have behavioral issues and poor decision making. In contrast, authoritative parents, and that term just does not stick very well for me, I like to call authoritative parenting amazing parenting, because this is the one that consistently shows the best results for kids both in the short term and in the long term. So authoritative parenting or amazing parenting is characterized by a high level of warmth and speaking sweetly to your child, and also high boundaries, so setting and enforcing boundaries consistently. And what the research shows is this type of parenting leads to fewer behavioral problems and better long-term mental health. So it's a win now and it's a win later for you and your child. So the key to successfully using this amazing parenting style is warm tone and firm boundaries. This makes your child feel safe and secure. So what does that look like? Let's talk about some examples of how you can be sweet yet firm when you're communicating with your child. The first example, when your child is speaking rudely, asking for something to eat or drink and doing it in a very unpleasant way. So what you might say back to them is, "I don't like being spoken to like that. Please try again." And then you give them an opportunity to rephrase in a more kind and polite way. The second example, let's imagine that a child is kicking their legs in their car seat. So they have a forward-facing car seat. They're kicking their legs because they're very upset. They've dropped their favorite stuffy and it's fallen to the side in the car. What you might say to them is, "I'm happy to help you look for it, but I need you to stop kicking first so I can safely reach over you to look. Are you ready to stop kicking?" And then you wait for them to stop kicking before you reach over and look for the toy. So you're setting clear boundaries and really establishing a very clear consequence. If they don't stop kicking, you won't help them look for the toy. If they do stop kicking, you will help them look for the toy. And so this really helps your child to feel secure and know what they need to do to participate in this interaction successfully. Okay, now the third example is one that comes up in my family a lot. So we're going on a car trip. The kids are allowed to use their iPads in the car, but not at the very beginning of the trip because we live on a very windy road, and using the iPad on the windy road makes them much more likely to suffer from car sickness. So they get in the car and they're upset because they can't have the iPad for the first 10 minutes or so of the ride. Here's a way that I responded to this situation just earlier this week. I said, "I know it's hard having to wait. Oh, I have a great idea. How about we get those Tic Tacs that you love and you can snack on them until we get to the highway?" This set me up for the bonus sweet interaction when I returned with the Tic Tac case and made sure that there were 6 Tic Tacs in there. I could say, "How many Tic Tacs do you think is the perfect amount for the sweetest 6-year-old I know?" And so then you give them the 6 Tic Tacs, they're thrilled, they're entertained until you get to the highway, and you are able to firmly maintain that boundary, uphold that limit of not using iPads till the highway, but everybody's happy instead of having a kicking and screaming 6-year-old. So as you can see, speaking warmly and upholding reasonable boundaries is very possible. It just takes some practice, some patience, and some creativity, but it allows you to truly become the loving authority figure in your family. Finally, let's talk about what happens if you don't speak sweetly to your child. Earlier, I mentioned some of the risks of using a permissive parenting style, the one that was high in warmth but low in boundaries. But what happens when you lack the warmth part? So you're low in warmth. This is where we want to talk about a psychology concept called attachment, the strong emotional bond that forms between a child and their primary caregiver. And this affects their sense of security, their healthy development, and their future relationships. So I mentioned at the beginning of this video that when kids don't form a secure, trusting attachment with their parents, they are more likely to become adults with trust issues that can make it hard to form close relationships. And in the short term, they may be reluctant to share important information with you and may be more sensitive to stress and have poorer emotion regulation. Now, I have a little story to tell you on this topic. So I mentioned the 6-year-old. Recently, I had a chance to hang out with a 6-year-old. And she said to me, "I love you. You talk so sweetly to me," which was a wonderful compliment to receive. Now, she also made a negative comparison to another caregiver and said, "I don't trust her." So hopefully there are other consistently warm and caring people in her life who can buffer the effects of not trusting this caregiver and prevent any lasting trust issues. Now, if you've gotten to this point in the video, then I know that you're a dedicated parent and that you never want your child to feel like they can't trust you. The good news is that talking sweetly to them will help you to gain their trust. Research studies on the parent-child attachment process, like the Kauai longitudinal study, have repeatedly shown is that having one consistently warm, responsive caregiver can help a child to become resilient and to grow into a healthy, well-adjusted adult. What that means for you as a parent is that consistently showing your child warmth through the way that you speak to them, your tone, your word choice, your volume, your nonverbal gestures, that matters far more than most parents realize. You can use the tips we discussed today to speak sweetly to your child this week, and pair that with the boundaries that we mentioned earlier, and you've got a winning combo for building a trusting, lifelong relationship with them. An important thing to remember is that parenting is rarely black and white. There are lots of shades of gray, and consistency is key. But remember that every parent has their off days, so just shoot for a relatively straight line in how warmly you interact with your child rather than sharp ups and downs. And check out my next video to learn the secret to taking stress, frustration, and overwhelm out of parenting in 12 weeks or less.